I'm going to take this time to go ahead and introduce our next speaker, Rick Clark. Rick Clark is a fifth-generation farmer from Williamsport, Indiana. The main goal on his farm is to build soil health and achieve balance with Mother Nature. Rick has developed and is constantly improving a systematic approach to regenerative farming. He is most proud of incorporating regenerative farming practices with all acres being certified organic. He calls it regenerative organic stewardship with no tillage. He will suppress weeds and build soil health with cover crops and no tillage. Rick also cares deeply about human health, as it is another important driver behind the organic no-till style of farming. Rick is building a system that will be viable and profitable for generations to come. If you guys will all help me, we're going to go ahead and welcome Rick to the stage.
This is perfect. This is all you need right here, folks, to determine soil health, right here. Everyone should have one of these in your pickup. That's a great thing to give away. Good morning. It's an awesome to be in South Dakota today. Thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate this. We can go a couple of directions here. I do have a presentation, but also willing to do Q&A if you'd like to do Q&A, whatever you want to do. It's not so much maybe about what I think you need to hear. Maybe it's what questions you have that maybe I can try to answer. So would anyone like to start with questions? If so, raise your hand. They do have people walking around with microphones. Here we go. What am I thinking about right now? You must have got that from somebody. Yeah, well, thank you. The question is, what am I thinking about right now? Here's what I'm thinking about right now. I am thinking about high input costs, how hard it is for young farmers to get into this business. I'm not sure that it's possible for a young person to start from zero anymore. I think it could happen, but I mean, you've got to be on your A game. And this is sad to me because we need the young folks coming, and I really worry about how they're going to figure out how to pay the bills. I mean, at home, and by the way, folks, home for me is West Central Indiana, and I am right on the Iowa-Missouri border if you come straight east, or everyone knows where Champaign, Illinois is. Straight east of Champaign, Illinois, we farm both sides of the Illinois-Indiana line. I have been hearing that in Illinois, cash rents are at $600 an acre now. I don't know how you make that work. And I don't know how a 22-year-old young lady or young man makes that work. So that's what's on my mind right now, is how are we going to get a secure future for the next generation? So great question. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, Rick?
Yeah.
Here.
Where are we at? Okay.
We talked about it a little bit last night, but we're early on in this thing, and everybody talks about the fire hose, and there's definite times I feel like I'm drowning rather than coming up on top of this.
Sure.
What's the best, how do you move forward with all this stuff and know that you're doing the right thing and not biting yourself where you shouldn't?
Yeah, that's a great question. How do we know that what we're doing is the right things? I'm always looking for validations, no matter what size they may be. For example, when we started realizing that we need to add pollinator strips, which now we plant roughly between 30 and 40 acres a year of pollinator strips. And I have a cocktail that I created. It's called Pollinator Palooza. It's got 16 or 17 different things in it. But when you then realize the amount of life that comes because of that pollinator strip, birds. I mean, people always say, I don't hear birds anywhere else but except on your farm or other farms like yours. That's a validation that what you're doing is correct. I know it may seem small, but that's a validation. back to the spade, right here. Aggregate stability is an easy one to score and look at. When we started our journey, we had no aggregate stability. 4 or 5 years in, we had 1 inch of aggregate stability. Now that we've been involved in this, in some instances, I guess I've been regenerative, on some of these fields about 14 years. We have aggregate stability now that's 6 to 8 inches deep. Well, that is a validation that what we're doing is correct. And there's a young lady sitting right here in the front row, Stephanie McLean. If you don't know her, you need to get to know her. Soil health specialist for the state of Minnesota. She's worked in South Dakota. She's worked in Indiana. She came to our farm, and she wanted to know if she could look at a few fields and do earthworm counts and water infiltration rates. And I said, you bet. And I didn't go with her. I didn't stay with her. Her and Joe Rorick did this on their own. We got to a point to where I think the average water infiltration rate was 20 inches an hour, and the earthworm counts were between 1.5 million and 2 million worms per acre. That is a validation that what you're doing is correct, okay? I hope I'm answering your question, but the main thing also I want to put out here on your question is we cannot jeopardize the livelihood of the farm on wacky ideas. We have to test, and we have to go slow, and we pick out 5 or 10 or 12 acres or whatever you're comfortable with, and we try these different ideas. Now, I was not asked to come here and tell everyone in South Dakota how to farm. That is not why I'm here. I am here to try to instill a couple of thoughts that maybe you take home. Chris Nichols will have a presentation. She's already given one. Take a couple of her thoughts. Eileen Kladevko will have a presentation. Take a couple of her thoughts. You take these ideas home from all of the presenters, and then you start to think about, how am I going to build a system around my context? Because the soil in Indiana is way different than it is in South Dakota. We know that. But the same principles apply everywhere around the world. So I hope I gave you an answer there, but you need to continue to look for things that validate that what you're doing is correct. That's how I mentally keep moving forward. Anything else? Raise your hand or stand up so the young man right here in the front. Here comes the mic. And you got 2 good books up here to give away. This one right here, this one's amazing.
All right. My question would be, what are like your top 5 things to measure that would validate you're doing something correctly if I was a beginner just starting out?
Okay, great. These are great questions. I love a crowd like this. You folks are very well educated. Top 5 things to look for. Again, you can do a lot with the spade. I just went through 2 or 3 of them. Water infiltration rate, water holding capacity. That one's a little harder to measure. I don't like carbon because there's no accurate way to measure carbon that I'm aware of, so I don't even talk about carbon. But a shovel will give you a shovel, a ring, a hammer, and 2 cylinder tubes will give you a lot of answers that what you're doing are the right things. The slake test, water infiltration rate, aggregate stability, earthworm counts. And then the other thing the things that really got me going in the beginning were immediate successes. And I think this is important. So, for example, the first year that we tried a cover crop, and the reason why most people try things different or out of their norm is because they are on a defensive mode. So the defense for me was soil erosion. How are we going to be defensive against soil erosion? Cover crops, no-till. First cover crop we planted on the farm was tillage radish. I think the internet said you need to plant 2 to 3 pounds an acre, so I thought if 2 to 3 was good, we're going to plant 6 or 8, because that's got to be better, right? Well, we had a humongous crop of tillage radish. And you know when you have a good, successful season of growing tillage radish is when the people in the community wonder what that stench in the air is. That's when you have good radishes growing. Okay, the next fall, not only did that field yield the best corn we had on the farm, it also was the best ROI because I treated that field as if it was no-till now. So we saved money on fuel, on tillage, labor, all of these things. So not only was it the best yielding farm, it was the best ROI farm, and that's what got me hooked. And then we moved from that 200-acre field to 2,000 acres. And then we saw the success still and went from 2,000 to 4,000 and so on and so on. And then after year 2 or 3, I could not get the acres quick enough because I saw what it was doing to the farm. Now, did I answer your question? Good enough? Okay. Now, I want to tell you folks, like I said, I did not come here to tell you how to farm. We are 100% organic with no tillage. Is that the proper way to farm? I'm not sure. It's very hard. It's very, very hard. I often wonder if we need to take a step back and maybe sometimes reset. I did that this year in 22. We had to till about 300 acres, and I cried every minute we did it. But the reason why we tilled this 300 acres was because there was an outbreak of Canada thistle. And I cannot, as a steward, let Canada thistle go to seed, and every farmer in the county had every right to turn me in if that would have happened. So we decided, or I decided, that tillage was going to be the course of action. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's what I decided to do. Now, I will tell you right now, though, the worst weeds on the farm were in those 300 acres that we tilled. So, we have to understand that sometimes that's okay, though, because we have to reset, we have to take care of a problem at hand. So if you're dealing with compaction, and everybody has compaction, I don't care how good of a job you think you're doing, we've all got compaction. Sometimes you may need the help of something else to get that compaction under control. But now the other thing I want to say here is the one thing that I've been stubborn on is I have not embraced the biology. Now, I don't mean the biology that we're growing in our own fields. I mean the augmentation of a biological program. I've been too stubborn. I am now preaching that if you want to build a systematic approach on your farm to become regenerative, you also need a systematic biological approach to go with it. And I think the first place you start is the Johnson-Su reactor, because that is creating biology that's inherent within your farm. I mean, the technology that is out there is unreal. You can send soil to a specific lab, and they can tell you what biology is in that sample. Then you go over to a finch row or a cemetery, somewhere that's not been disturbed, and you send that soil to them. They now identify what's in the inherent parent soil, they identify what soil you're lacking, and they prescribe a biology program to get your soil to match the inherent natural soil. That's big time. Now you've got a system that's ready for the change you are about ready to begin with. Because you have to imagine the soil is a living, breathing organism. I mean, I said we've got aggregate stability that's 6 to 8 inches deep. Think of the airspace we have in that soil. It's breathing in oxygen and exhaling CO2. I always say, in my opinion, the 3 limiting factors to raising corn are water, nutrients, and carbon dioxide. If you have a healthy, breathing soil that's exhausting CO2, and you have a beautiful corn plant growing out in the field, where's the stomata at on a corn plant? Right down here on the bottom side of the leaf, where all that CO2 is coming up, and that stomata, I've seen the pictures of it. It opens and closes just like our mouth does. It's breathing in, breathing out. That's why you need the aggregate stability, because just envision a jar full of marbles and look at how much airspace there is between all of those aggregates in there. That's what we're talking about. Then you get tilth. Then the army or the earthworms come. Then the beneficials come. And when you get into this process and you then become healthy, pests are not going to bother you, because pests will not bother a healthy growing environment. Now, some people will go out and spray sugar to bring your bricks up, and I think that's okay. You know, if you hear that there's an armyworm outbreak in the county and you want to be prepared, the cheapest and quickest way to do it is go get a half a pound to a pound of sugar, mix it with 20 gallons of water, and spray your cash crop. And the armyworms will probably leave you alone, because what happens is it creates a complex protein that when that armyworm takes a bite of that, it cannot digest that and it will kill it. So that's $2 an acre or less. And you're not smoking all the beneficials. So that's my thought on biology. Any other questions? Yes, sir. What resources do I learn from? I do a lot of testing on farm. We learn from that. I do listen to interests that I have are biological driven. So I'm listening to Chris Nichols, Christine Jones, Nicole Masters, Elaine Ingham. Those people are very intriguing to me. And there's others that I haven't mentioned, and I apologize if I haven't mentioned anyone. I do love coming to conferences like this, because I get to sit down and visit with folks that farm differently than I do. So I probably learn more in person or listening to something than I do I don't read a lot. I don't have a lot of time to read. It seems like I'm always doing something, so reading's difficult for me, and I've got floaters, so I'll be reading and then a floater will come across and I can't see anything on the page until it disappears. It becomes very frustrating. So that's how I learn, is listening to podcasts and visiting with folks like you folks here. And that brings me up to another point that I want to say. Do not underestimate the power of what goes on this conference right here. I flew in here last night at 6 o'clock. I walked into this room, and there were, 20 tables of these discussions going on. It was unreal. And people were engaged and throwing their ideas out, and I love it. I love it when you get two 70-year-old guys out, and they've got their phone out, and they're sharing pictures of what they're doing on the farm. That's what it's all about. So please don't underestimate. I mean, there's plenty of people in this room that could be up here on this stage instead of me. Find them, seek them out. Here, I'm going to ask the question. I try to ask at every presentation. Who has been no-tilling in here for at least 30 years? Raise your hand. Stand up. Stand up. That's crazy. Now just stay standing up. Can we get to 40 years? Anybody 40 years? Right there. Where are you from, sir?
Ideal, South Dakota.
South Dakota.
Ideal.
Ideal.
180 miles straight west.
You know who I would be seeking in this? 40 years of no-till. And they said you can't do it. What keeps you going? Because you know it works?
It's the right thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean to put this gentleman on the spot, but folks, those are the folks that you seek out because they understand what needs to be done in South Dakota, or I'm sure some of the folks are from Minnesota or maybe even Iowa. We're close to all three of these states. That's what makes this so fun. Everywhere I have been to speak, everywhere, I've asked that question, and there's always at least one person that stands up in the crowd that's been no-tilling for at least 30 years. That's phenomenal to me. So thanks again. Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate that. Appreciate your leadership. Any other questions? Yes, sir, right here. Hang on. Here's your mic. Look to your left.
A year ago at this time, hadn't even thought about the word biology. Neighbor invited me and my son here to learn how to compost for biology. One thing led to another and to another. I got like 4,000 feet of compost. And
Perfect.
And I'm sitting there looking at it, and I guess my question to you is, and I've been asking other people in the room, do you try to quantify, because I don't even know what I don't know.
Right.
Do I try to quantify what's there, or the phrase that keeps coming to my mind is, what the hell, let's try it and see what we learn. Mm-hmm. What do you typically try to do? I mean,
Yeah.
at one point you want to try to quantify success, failure, but as I started down this process, you start looking at small changes, and those small changes are leading me, and is that what you're seeing, or what do you try to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Data here is critical, okay? We've been a data-driven farm for 25 years. And when you become data-driven, you then sit down and run scenarios like, can we raise cereal rye in front of corn? And if we can, what's the rate of cereal rye, and what else do we need to do? I wouldn't be able to answer those questions without the data. So here's how I'm going to answer your question. And we're doing the same thing. I'm going to treat biology as exactly like I would ask you to treat starting this journey. You have to baseline where you are. So to baseline biology, in my opinion, unless someone has a better answer, because this is all new to me, because I've been stubborn at this, but I would take a sample. This is what I'm going to do. We're going to pull a sample out of that reactor, and I'm going to send it to biomakers. And I'm going to have biomakers tell us what is in this sample, and we're going to baseline that. We're going to get an Excel spreadsheet out, and we're going to take all of the data on that report, and we're going to log it. Then we're going to come back maybe 4 months later and send another sample in and compare and see what's happening with this biology. Because now they won't be able to identify everything that's in there, but they can tell you the number count of microbes that are in there. They can give you a bacterial to fungal relationship, and they can give you a pH, along with many other things. So again, it's no different than any other test that you take. It is a snapshot in time. We have to remember this. I'm diabetic. So if you were to take my blood sugar right now, it's a snapshot in time. But then if I was to sit down and eat a bowl of ice cream, what do you think would happen to my sugar? But yet 5 minutes ago, my count was 99. Well, in 20 minutes after the ice cream, it's going to be 199. So when I look at test results, I do not make decisions based on that moment in time. I make decisions based on the trend. What is the trend of inorganic nitrogen? What is the trend of organic nitrogen? I'm now referring to the Haney test. I love the Haney Soil Health Test. That is how I'm going to relate it back to your biology question. I don't know. So we have to then appeal to the experts. Chris Nichols is here today. She's going to give another presentation, and then we're on a panel together this afternoon. That's probably a good question for her. But again, we have to baseline where we are. I don't care what it is you're doing. And I don't get paid anything. I'm not selling anything, but I try to give you information that I think is important. And there's a young man who spoke here yesterday, Mitchell Hora. He is in Iowa. He has a company called Continuum Ag. He has a platform called Topsoil. That is where I would put all of your information to start baselining your farm. Or even if you're into this journey, still check him out and move it up. He's not going to sell your information. He's not going to do anything. It's extremely powerful. You can do regression. You can ask what ifs. You can pressure test it. And you can also get prepared for when the day comes that there might be, and I am no longer going to use the word carbon market. The day is going to come when you should be getting a soil health market. And then we're going to be able to really pay the right way for the practices that we're doing. So again, Mitchell's a friend of mine, a great young man. He's got a tremendous company there. That is what I would be doing, things like that. But baseline where you are today. And yeah, I mean, we don't know what's in there. I mean, you take a teaspoon and walk out here and scoop up a teaspoonful of soil. There's more living organisms in that teaspoon than there are people on the planet. So it's going to take a while to identify what's in there. But again, the trend, that's why I like PLFA. PLFA will give you the count of the biology. I mean, we've got PLFA scores 3,000 plus. CO2 burst 400 plus. I mean, all of these things are important in understanding that what you're doing is the right thing. Okay, anything else? Anybody else? Right over here.
Can you speak to your attempt to no-till corn organically in alfalfa?
Yeah, my attempt. That's a good way to put it. He would like for me to speak to my attempt for, is this the clicker right here? How do we advance? I've never seen one like this. Okay. I'm going to answer your question in just a second. Folks, this right here is where it all begins. This is my immediate family. You have to have the support of everyone involved. Because if you don't, it's not going to probably end well. I probably offend people by this next comment, but that's okay. If you have negative people around you, get different people. There's no room for negativity, because negativity drags everybody down. There is so much happening. This is a dynamic, living, breathing system, and it changes by the moment. In 2022, I went through 38 plans. And you're thinking, why in the world is this guy up here talking to us? He went through 38 plans. Well, either A, I don't know what I'm doing, or B, it's just that difficult. And it's the latter. And it may be some of the first two. But things change. I mean, we're at a conference in January, and we're going to come up with the grand plan for the farm for 23, and by March the 2nd, it's all going to change. It happens every year. Now, let's answer your question. I was going to show some videos, but I think they're buried deep in my presentation. Okay, the corn, this is difficult. I do not recommend this on large scale. I will tell you this, we've done this for 4 years. 2022 was the first year that it did not work, okay? We've been able to raise corn in alfalfa, no-till, and when the corn gets to canopy, it will terminate the alfalfa. In our first fields that we did, that's how we transitioned to organic, we did alfalfa. The very first fields that were certified organic were cornfields. There is no alfalfa in those fields, none. So what we have to do, here's the way I do this. There's many thoughts on how to do this. But what we do is I like to let the alfalfa get to 50% bloom. Then we pull in with the planter and we no-till corn into the alfalfa. Then when the corn is at V1, V2, we roll it flat with a roller crimper. Now the crimper is not going to terminate the alfalfa, but it is going to lay the alfalfa down, and now your corn plant can see daylight. Corn does not like any neighbors, period. I don't care if it's alfalfa, I don't care if it's oats, it doesn't matter. Corn does not like neighbors. So then the hope here is you need a rain event here, because you are talking about sheer suicide here. We're planting a warm season grass, corn, into an established perennial of alfalfa. This is not good. But when Mother Nature cooperates, it works. And I have a 70-30 rule, and my 70-30 rule is 70% of weed suppression is occurred from the cover crop, and the remaining 30% is from the cash crop canopy. So keep that in mind now, and this is what's happening to the alfalfa underneath the corn that's growing. We are on 20-inch row spacing on the corn because I think that's important, because we need this canopy. When you get this to happen successfully, the canopy will then suppress and terminate the alfalfa. It'll turn yellow, it'll drop all of its leaves, and it will crush it if you get to the canopy and get growing. Like I said, in 22 was the first year it did not work for us. We hit 7 weeks with no rain and 92 degrees. The corn could not handle that in this alfalfa environment. So, I do not propose tillage here, but maybe what we need to consider, and I'm not even sure on the alfalfa, because everyone always says, why don't you just take that first cutting of alfalfa off and then plant your corn? Well, that's fine, except there's a couple things happening here. I need all those nutrients that just left the field, and when you cut alfalfa, what's it want to do? It wants to regrow. I do not want it to regrow. That's why I go in at 50% bloom. Every living thing on this planet has one thing to do in its lifetime: procreate. So when you get alfalfa to that stage where it's 50% bloom, it's almost done until you cut it. Then it's going to regrow and do it again. So I don't want it to regrow and be competition for the corn. So when and now this alfalfa is 28, 29, 30 inches tall. So when you lay this down, there's two things that I've seen are going to happen. After 4 or 5 or 6 days, it's going to try and stand itself back up out on the ends. That's what it's going to want to do, because it's going to want to get to the sun. Then the other thing that's going to happen is wherever this crown was and you rolled it over, if you happen to break something at that crown, here comes another shoot off that's going straight up immediately with the corn. So try this on 5 acres, 10 acres. I would try also maybe a little light tillage, because I think we might be okay if we till shallow, maybe, but we are destroying biology. But I think if you put fuel back in the ground, the biology will probably bounce back. I'm not a very big proponent of tillage, as most of you know, but again, you can't be just so stubborn that you don't see other choices. And I'm a very stubborn person, and sometimes that hurts me. So I hope I answered your question. I've got some videos toward the end. I'll try to get there. I think we can do this, but again, it's going to take some cooperation from Mother Nature. Now, I don't know if there's any water in this area, any pivot water in this area. If you do have pivot water, I'd be all about doing that, raising corn into alfalfa. It's a great way to transition to organic if that's the desire you have, and it's a great way to eliminate or minimize weeds. There are no weeds in these alfalfa fields. When you clip them 4 times a year and take it away, now that's another thing we got to remember, it's total removal, it's a high nitrogen environment, the carbon is being sucked out of the life of this soil. So what we do is, at the end of the last cutting, we go into an alfalfa field and we plant 50 to 60 pounds of cereal rye and let that come up and grow, and then that gets taken off with the first cutting next spring, and we're at least trying to bring some carbon back into the system here. But straight legumes are not very good for soil health. I hope I answered your question.
Rick, I've got a question for you.
Where are we at?
In the back here.
Yeah.
Are you incorporating any livestock into your operation?
Yes. Livestock.
And
yes.
if so, how are you doing it?
Yeah, I'm not doing it like I would really like to be doing it. I don't have enough people right now, but what we've done in the past, and I am not a grazing expert. This gentleman here is, Mr. Gabe Brown is a grazing expert. I am not. But what we have done in the past is we have built paddocks that will last 5 to 6 days. So that way I check the cattle twice a day, but I don't have to worry about trying to move them. Is that the best way to graze? Probably not. Because even in that 5 or 6 days, they will cut a path through that paddock to get to the water. You know how cattle are. They cut one path and they all run that same path. If you do the mob grazing and move every 3-4 hours, you typically do not get that. So I'm not probably following the grazing rules in that aspect, but I am following the rules of 50% removal. You've got to move the animals. So if I thought the paddock was going to last 6 days and after 4, it's where it should be, we're moving them. Now, sheep are the next thing. I've not truly grazed the sheep yet, but my wife has started a sheep herd, and I like the way the sheep function. Sheep are way different than cattle. You drive cattle wherever you want to take them. You lead sheep wherever you want to take them. That's a huge difference. I mean, you just literally, here's sheep, and they just come and they'll follow you right around the room and go right out that door. Now, I think a great combo or great trifecta would be cattle, sheep, and chickens. In that order. I think that would be a great trifecta to have for grazing. Again, I'm not a grazing expert. That's how we do it. And honestly, I culled the herd really hard in 22, so we're in a rebuilding mode right now. So the grazing that we're doing is going to be on very limited acres. But I will tell you this. The acres that reacted to PLFA counts, biology, aggregate stability, all of these things that you're looking for were happening quicker and more efficiently behind the livestock. So does that work in every operation? No way. No way. People are allergic to animals. People don't want to have anything to do with animals. I get that. But if you do want to efficiently increase increase soil health, livestock need to be on the farm somewhere.
So are you using the animals for weed control or for biology or for both, or how are you incorporating it?
Yeah, the animals are more for the biology aspect and building soil health aspect. Now, again, I'm not a grazing expert and I'm probably not doing it the proper way, but if you were to put a large group of animals in a small area, they're going to be weed control for you. The way I'm doing it, they've got probably too much area. They're going to be a little more selective. They're going to eat what they want to eat, and the weeds will probably be left behind. So then we need to come with the chopper and mow those down, keep them under control, and then we're coming in with the secondary cover crop to help suffocate those weeds. So again, I'm not probably doing it the proper way or the most efficient way, but if you want to probably, and we can't say the word control because that's too strong of a word, but if you want to suppress weeds, probably livestock of large numbers in a small area. They'll attack everything. Because I don't know if you've ever seen those videos, but when Gabe turns 800 head into 2 acres, which I don't even know how you do that, it's a free-for-all on what they can get their mouths on, and they're grabbing anything and everything. So, yes, I'm not doing it the right way, but yes, I think you could suppress weeds and build soil health if you did it properly, yes. Anything else? Okay, I will move on. We've got about 15 minutes. Let me, and please stop, yell, whatever you want to do here, okay? I want to get to a couple of things real quick. All right, on the farm, we've been no-tilling beans for 19 years, corn for 14, cover crops 14, farming green for 12, and my definition of farming green is planting your cash crop into a living, growing green cover crop and not terminating typically until after you've planted. That's farming green. Epigenetics, I'm going to get to that in a minute. Biostimulants for a year and on-site bioreactors. Again, I think these bioreactors, I'm not going to say that your whole biology program should be geared around a Johnson-Su reactor. That's not what I'm saying. But I think it's a great way to incorporate what's inherent within your region because that's the biology that needs to be more prolific in your system. 9 cropping system at home now. Our neighbors have 2 for the most part, but it's corn, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa, peas, milo, cover crop, cattle, and sheep. And then +1 is regen. That's where you take a year out of production and you get the cover crop package that you need to get that field back in step. Now, I just gave you 3 ways to plant cover crops successfully in your farm. I don't care where you farm. I just gave you 3 ways in that, what I just said right there. I mentioned a cereal grain. So plant a cereal grain. Do not double crop soybeans. Plant a cocktail package. Number 2 was livestock. We will come in and we will plant a cocktail behind the cattle, with the cattle, and in front of the cattle, depending on what time of year it is and what are we wanting to plant and are we running out of time for the freeze date. And then the +1 is regen. So there's not very many more excuses. I've heard them all, and there's not very many more excuses that can be made to not have time to plant cover crops. 5,600 acres of certified organic. Remainder of acres are in transition. We've used no starter fertilizer, no fungicides, no seed treatments, no insecticide, no P or K, and no ag lime in 9 years. Somebody asked earlier about how do you know what you're doing is correct. When you don't know these things until you do the tests and collect the data. But when you take a Haney test in 2019, for example, And then you now compare a Haney test in 22 on the same field, and your P and K levels have either stayed the same or gone up. That's a validation that what you're doing is correct. And that's what we're doing. No nitrogen applied in 4 years. Now we've tried a little bit of manure, and I don't care much for manure, because every time I try the manure, it just, all it does is energize the weeds, and the weeds outgrow the cash crop. So we're trying to figure out how to do this with Mother Nature. Organic with no tillage. We're trying our best to do there. If you don't know what these are, you need to write them down. And I have them listed in what I think is the importance of order. Minimize disturbance. This is chemical disturbance and tillage. Can we be 100% no-till? It's very, very difficult, but do not jeopardize the livelihood of your farm to be that stubborn, okay? But try and at least eliminate recreational tillage or tillage that's just year after year after year. Maximize diversity. It's all about diversity. Diversity in cover crops, diversity in cash crops. It's diversity, diversity, diversity. Living roots. You got to have a living root. I think that Dr. Nichols said, 280 days a year? Yeah, I'll go with that number. Maybe even more if you can. Armor the soil. Got to protect it. Context. It doesn't matter where you are. It's context. These first four work everywhere around the world. It's just, what species are we going to plant? How are we going to terminate? When are we planting? It just changes a little bit on the prescription. Livestock. This is important. Very important. If you're going to build the soil health quickly and efficiently, livestock need to be part of the equation. And if I could add a seventh one, it is commitment. You need to be committed. And I don't mean committed as in a mental institute, but you need to be committed to doing this. It's a mindset. Balance. Everything we're talking about here is balance. Right now, I am fighting foxtail. But I think there's several things happening here. First of all, I think progression is real. Progression, this is what I mean. What comes first? Broadleaf weeds. What comes second? Grass. What comes third? Trees and shrubs. Or shrubs. And then what comes fourth? Trees. I see this happening on the farm. We've got fields that we combined beans in last year, and you go out there in August, and there's trees growing in the field this tall. So we are in the middle of progression. That's part of what's going on. The second thing that I think is going on is I have inadvertently created my own problem here. Everything you do in life, I don't care what it is, everything has unintended consequences. Everything. The question is, can you see them soon enough before it gets too late? Here's what I think I've done. By living, and it's even worse here because you're north of me, it gets cold here early and it gets cold for a long time. So when you are in this window, you don't have very many choices of cover crops to plant. And when we're harvesting soybeans on October the 25th, there's not very many things we can do except a cereal grain. And it's primarily cereal rye. Now here's what I think I've done to myself. When, again, it goes back to data. We track the balance of fungal to bacterial relationships in the soil through the Haney test. When we started this journey, and when Rick came online with his test, we were almost 100% bacterial-based farm. That's not where you want to be. We have been able, through diversity and crop rotations and all of these things, move the needle from bacterial to right here of a midline. Here's bacterial, here's fungal, right here in the middle. But I think what's happened now is I have relied on cereal rye so much. And cereal rye is an extremely high carbon to nitrogen ratio. I believe I have destroyed or extremely offset the biological system. And we have actually shifted from a fungal back into a bacterial because of this action. Now, I don't know. This is my speculation on what's happening. I need someone to say yes or no, or maybe, I never thought about that. Maybe that's a good idea. I don't know. This is what I'm seeing, though, by continuing to do the testing, and we see the trend of fungal to bacterial relationships. I see them shifting back toward bacterial, and I see foxtail going bonkers. So let's think about that for just a moment. Now let's think about the biology. What you want to do is create an environment that foxtail does not want to grow in. That's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about killing foxtail, or we're not talking about killing giant ragweed. We're talking about creating a biological environment that those specific weeds do not want to germinate in. So the number one thing that everyone always wants to tell me is, Rick, your calcium's out of whack. I can show you a Haney test that will have 3,000 parts of calcium. I do not have a calcium problem. But I can also show you a SAP test. If you haven't done SAP testing, that's the next thing, SAP. SAP testing gives you what's in the plant. And this is not a tissue test. This is way beyond a tissue test. Capital S, capital A, capital P, SAP test. When you go out to take a SAP test, you pull an old leaf and a new leaf, and you compare the two together. And now, when you look at the sap, there's less than 100 parts per million of calcium in that plant. So it's not that I don't have a calcium problem, I have a calcium uptake problem. So the system is not balanced to create the mechanism that allows calcium to become available. And then guess what? If the calcium was available, there wouldn't be any foxtail. That's why I first started off this presentation with me being so darn stubborn. It's crazy. I have underestimated the power of the biology. I was arrogant enough to think that by eliminating the tillage, eliminating the chemistry, we were growing our own biology. And yes, we are. But you have to understand, these are systems that have been put to sleep for I don't know how many years now. When you bring in high fertility and high tillage, what do the microbes have to do? Nothing. So we have to get them back into a system that gets them going. That's why I like biostimulants, hormones. How are we going to turn on what's there? Am I out of time here? About 5 minutes. Take advantage. I want to move through this fast. This is the formula for photosynthesis, folks. I'm not a biologist. I wish I was. And by the way, I don't know if there's any young kids in here. Anyone who comes to me, I try to do a lot with FFA at home. I do the most I can because that's the group that's going to be running the planet soon. So I try to talk to those folks as much as I can. But when they ask me, Rick, what would you recommend an education to be a regenerative farmer? I say major in biology and minor in ecology. And you will have a system that will handle with what we're talking about. Because I wish I knew that if you took this away, that creates this problem. whatever this is. I wish I knew what those things were. All I know, this is all I need to know. You've got professionals that are way smarter than me. One of them's here today, Dr. Chris Nichols. She can explain why. Let's let her do that. This is all I know. We have to maximize the amount of oxygen and the amount of sugar that we pump into the ground. And it happens through that right there. Period. Again, this is why you need as much aggregate stability as you can, because this is where your soil is breathing. Inhale, exhale, sunlight coming in, sugars pouring out of the exudates. That's what we need. The power of cereal rye. I'm going to run out of time. Would you like for me to get to the videos on the corn and the alfalfa? Is that what we want to go to? Real quickly, though, I want you to see the amount of sequestration that cereal rye has. Look at 28-inch rye. I don't know if there's a pointer on it. Maybe this guy. Okay. Look at this. 12-inch rye, and I'm going to guess most rye in the country is terminated at 12 inches because we can't let it get too tall. It'll get out of control. 28-inch rye is brought, and this is just the above ground material, 2 foot by 2 foot square, clip everything out, put it in a bag, send it to the lab, ask for a feed analysis. This is what you get, along with many other micro and macronutrients. 134 pounds of N in the above ground material, 281 pounds of potash. Is this available at a moment's notice? No. It needs to be digested, consumed by the microbes, and then returned back in a very stable organic state. So if your corn crop does not take it, or your bean crop does not take everything that's available here, it's stable as long as your soil doesn't blow away or wash away. It's there for the next crop you plant. This is why it's difficult to plant corn in front of, plant corn into cereal rye, because this is what's happening. Look at the amount of nitrogen that it is sequestering out of that profile. So once you understand this, plant corn all day long into cereal rye, just bring nitrogen forward into the program. And you'll get away with it.
How about the intensively grazed rye off?
Yeah. Intensively raise the rye off. Now, you got to worry about compaction. I don't know where you're at here, but you need to worry about the footprint of the compaction and then coming with corn right behind that animal. But yes, I have no problem with that. Again, I'm probably breaking the grazing rules, but if you want to terminate certain species, let the cattle take them down hard, and they can't recover, and then you come in with your cash crop following and let the cash crop go. I have. What's that?
Would that cut the availability of time?
Of this?
Yes.
Probably, yes.
By half?
I don't know if I want to say half. I don't know that. But now look at this next slide. Right here. This was taken 2 months after termination. The nitrogen only dropped 50 pounds. So there's still a bunch of nitrogen in that. Now remember, this was 6 foot tall rye that we roll or crimped flat to the ground. And the microbes start eating it from the bottom up. But look at the 0060. It is almost exhausted out to where we now raise a bean crop and it's there. This is why we don't add P or K anymore. All right, now this is huge here. I put the dollar amount of just NP and K on these at the various growth levels. Look at the 28-inch rye. It's $435 worth of N, P, and K in that plant. That's crazy. And I use these numbers on August the 1st. So the numbers may have changed a little bit. I think maybe the fertilizers come down a little bit. But those are the numbers I use to get to those calculations. Same thing with nitrogen. Do you realize that we're breathing in 78% of nitrogen right now, and if we were to walk out the door, there's between 20 and 30,000 tons of nitrogen above every acre of ground. 20,000 tons. How much do we need to raise a corn crop? 100? Why are we adding any nitrogen? Let's get some legumes going and let's bring it in. So same thing, 2 foot by 2 foot square, come out here on May the 20th, and I took a sample, and then June the 4th. Now I want you to look at, and I apologize, I'm going fast, but I'm out of time. I want you to look at this line right here. 114 pounds of N. Now this, again, 2 foot square, all above ground. But now, you got to remember, a legume is a nodulating species. It's fixing nitrogen. And I've always thought about, well, we're not even taking into account of what's below ground. Well, that's true. We're not, because I don't know how to do that. But I don't know how much is left below ground, because what's being fixed in those nodules is pushing up to the upper part of the plant. So there's probably still some left, but not as much as I first anticipated. All right, look at 4 days, folks. In 4 days, look at these numbers. It's geometric. Now, I don't want to plant corn on June the 8th, and you probably don't either. So come back in time, and let's plant somewhere right here. Let's extrapolate and say you didn't terminate until right in here somewhere. So we've got 200 pounds of nitrogen that this plant has fixed. Is all that available to? No. But let's take half of it. I've done this long enough, half is going to be available. So 100 pounds at just say $1 a pound is $100 an acre. So this is what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to reduce your synthetic load by that 100 pounds and use whatever other synthetic load you use, and let the balance of nature let nature bring up the balance. Look at what happens 6 weeks later. There's hardly anything left. Over 200 pounds of nitrogen has been released out of those plants. You only get this if you do the testing. Now back to that cereal rye chart. When I first did that, I did it on a growth stage. Now we've changed that. We do it every Monday. We're taking a sample on every Monday from whenever we think the first day of spring, or not the first day of spring, but in the spring, the first day the rye is coming out of dormancy. We test on every Monday all the way through till harvest, because I want to see where did it peak and where did it exhaust out, and did it ever fully release. It will eventually release, because the microbes will eventually consume it all and it'll be brought back. But we have to understand, at that point in time, it's organic. It's stable. So if we don't capture it in this crop, we're going to capture it in the next one. And let's say the next crop is a cover crop. Well, then it all does it again. Now, this is what I truly think of being regenerative. We are bringing everything back up from deep within the profile and redistributing it, and it's coming back down through the profile, readily available to be taken up by whatever plant you've got growing. Now let's go to the same thing I did on the dollar one. This is going to blow your mind. Now May 20th, $291. June the 4th, $468. Are you ready for this one? That's insane. $1,000 an acre of just N, P, and K. I'm not taking into account the boron, the sulfur, the magnesium, any of these things. And then again, the exhaustion, 6 weeks later, we're only down to about $120 worth. I use the same levels here. This, to me, is extremely powerful. So now you start thinking about creative ways to do things. So what do I have next here? Okay, frost seeding. I wanted to show frost seeding real quick. I know you're in a cold state. Don't give up. You can go out, but you have to understand that when you frost seed, it's more vegetative growth than it is root growth, so you're not going to get near the nutrient load in a frost-seeded species. So that, now, bear in mind here, look at my note down here at the bottom. This cannot be terminated mechanically. That guy right there, wow. Is that a great species for forage? But do not think you're going to terminate that without chemistry. Wow, did I make a mistake? Been fighting that for 4 years. So remember, what is your end game for termination? But here's the nutrient analysis. Okay, let me back up real quick. Let's see. I'm not sure what button takes me back. But I wanted to show the frost seeding was, I think, on March the 10th. This is June the 10th. So what is that, 90 days? Look at what was brought up in just 90 days of frost seeding. Is it enough to carry the load? No. But it sure is a good way towards starting to wean yourself off synthetic inputs. If we need to shut down, let me know. We have been able to reduce fuel on our farm by 50%. Most of that is because of that right there. We've dropped our horsepower by 64%. No longer need all that horsepower running around out there burning up fuel. But the other way we've eliminated fuel is by eliminating trips across the field. We're trying to do 3 passes and raise a crop, folks. We're trying to plant a cover crop in the fall, no-till a cash crop in the spring, and roll to terminate. That's all we're trying to do. Synthetic N, nothing, nothing, nothing. These are all averages across the farm over these years. Now, I took those same savings and put them on a value. Diesel fuel savings, $62,000. Synthetic N, $605,000. MAP, potash, this is the one that blows my mind, saving $483,000 on chemistry that's done nothing but give us weeds that are resistant to that chemistry. For a grand total savings of, and I've got seed in there now because we're raising our own seed, we're saving on our farm right now about $2.1 million. That's big. In my opinion, that's huge. So, again, I don't know who knows who I am or who doesn't, but I don't drive this system by yield. It is not driving this system. It's about soil health and it's about human health. Yes, we need yield to pay the bills. Yes, we do. I understand that. But I am not looking at this system as, let's see, how can we raise 220 bushel corn? That's not the way I think. I think about how can we make this system even better and have less weeds? How do we suppress the foxtail? How do we I think we're headed in the right direction. So hopefully my years of unfortunate, or I don't ever say the word failure, I say outcomes I didn't expect. I know it's the same thing, but failure is you're a failure. That's a very negative word. But that was an outcome I didn't expect, and let's don't do that again. Let's learn from that. That is much more easy. Believe me, I've had a lot of things I didn't expect. That's why I try to tell you what I've seen and try to trim 4 or 5 years off your journey. I'm going to move quickly through this. I talked about Mitchell. I want to get to a couple things that I'm doing now that I think are going to be the future. This right here is Dr. Rick Haney's Soil Talker. And there's I know that's a really funky way to do somebody's email, but that's jason@droptinewildlife.com. What this thing is it reads the CO2 in the profile live. This is insane. So this now goes back to Rick's test. Rick's test uses water as his extractant, so he's re-wetting that soil, and then the microbes come alive, and guess what happens? They start breathing, they're exhausting CO2, and the CO2 levels go up. So here is a chart, and I've got Rick's permission to use these 3 slides right here. This is the soil talker, CO2 versus organic nitrogen. So you've got organic nitrogen over here, and you've got the CO2 release over here. Look at what happens as the CO2 release goes up, so does the nitrogen that's available within that profile, the organic nitrogen. Again, a validation that we need to be building soil health. This slide here shows the infield CO2 respiration before a rain event. So as it rained, the CO2 went up. And I see it, I've got one of these things in my farm. You get an auger and you drill a hole and you put in a piece of PVC and you put it in the ground. It's got holes in it. And then you put a cap on it. You hook it to it looks like a breathalyzer. And it's reading the CO2 and you can watch it climb as the soil gets wet. So this is a big deal. Epigenetics. Heritable phenotype changes that do not involve alterations in the DNA sequence. Wow, imagine that. We could actually raise something that's not genetically modified. These phenotypic trait changes may result from external or environmental factors or be part of normal development. Here's what I'm saying. We are raising crops, seeds now, that we will no longer purchase. And we are going to let those seeds adapt to our system. Same thing with livestock. We do not introduce outside livestock. We gather our breeding herd from within the herd of animals we have. So, here's what we did. Now remember, we all know we cannot bin run GMO anything. We all know that. Do you also understand that you cannot bin run non-GMO soybeans? They don't have traits, that's correct, but the genetics are patented. So legally, you cannot plant a non-GMO bean, harvest it, put 200 bushel in a bin, and plant it next spring. You're breaking the law. So what we did was, and I don't want to have the current genetics. I want genetics that are working with the system. The current genetic pool is built around high fertility and high tillage. We don't do either of those two. And the genetics today are losing their association with the mycorrhizal fungi. So here's what we did. We went to this great place in, I think it's Greeley, Colorado, I think. It's the USDA building that houses every seed known to man and woman. You go to their catalog and you look through what you want to purchase. These are genetics that are off patent. So we bought 30-year-old Asgrow genetics. Anybody in the room remember Asgrow 3127? That's one of the ones we bought. You get 100 seeds. You hand plant those, you grow them out, you harvest by hand, you take that yield, you hand plant again, grow that out, take it. Now in 22, we were up to planting 40 acres of beans that are 30-year-old genetics. And we are going to now plant that seed every year. And take from that harvest, put it in a separate bin, and that will be our seed stock. That's epigenetics. I cannot stress enough how I went through the litany there of what we did. We went back and found genetics that are off patent. We're going to do the same thing in corn, but I'm going to go with open pollinator corn because I don't want to worry about detasseling. So we're going to try open pollinator corn. I already tried it. Again, and I think the microbes are the same thing. Epigenetics within the microbes. That's why I like the Johnson-Su reactor for some augmentation, because that reactor was built with things that were on our farm. Leaves, alfalfa, and some manure. Maslins. This is another one that's pretty cool. This is so weird. I've been doing this for 2 years now. And I swear this thing right here, it knows everything you say and do because in an hour there'll be an article about Maslins on here. Well, there was an article about Maslins that came across my phone about 3 months ago, and I read it. It's a 3,000-year-old tradition to where they raised multiple cereals together, harvested them together, and made bread out of that combination. Well, we're doing the same thing. I decided that since we have to use cereals so much, I now have created a diversity within the cereals. So we now plant rye, wheat, and barley together. I think you could add triticale to that if you can get it to grow in time. And now that's the diversity that we have within that grass group. I know they're all still grasses, but they each give off different exudates. I'm done. The boss said I'm done. And when the boss says you're done, you're done. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate the time you gave me. There's a picture of our Johnson Sioux. I'm going to go ahead and scroll to a couple of the videos that I've got at the end and let them play while it's break time. So thank you.